For years, tariffs have been the weapon of choice for American presidents looking to force their rivals to the table. But when Donald Trump raised the stakes to a staggering 35% against Canada, the fallout wasn't what Washington had expected. Instead of hurting Ottawa first, the shockwaves began at home, shaking corporate America and slipping into the lives of ordinary families. What was supposed to be a calculated blow against a neighbor instead exposed just how vulnerable the American economy had become. The signs of trouble appeared faster than anyone in the White House wanted to admit. Automakers were the first to sound the alarm. General Motors reported more than $1 billion in tariff-related losses in a single quarter. Ford trailed close behind, down $800 million. Even the industrial titan Stanley Black Decker warned it would shoulder the same hit by year's end. Apple, always quick to read economic weather, quietly added another billion in expected tariff costs. These weren't small dents. They were proof that the tariffs were slicing through the very companies that fueled America's image of industrial strength. And it didn't stop at boardrooms. Retailers like Walmart and Best Buy, unable to absorb rising costs, began passing them on to consumers. Suddenly, something as routine as buying shampoo or shoes carried a hidden surcharge. Even a simple cup of morning coffee wasn't safe. Brazil, one of the largest suppliers, was caught in the tariff crossfire. Experts warned this was the moment everyday Americans would start to feel the bite. The strategy that was supposed to pressure rivals had boomeranged, striking the people Trump had promised to protect. And yet, across the northern border, Canada was bracing for its own storm. On August 1st, Ottawa found itself in the crosshairs. A new 35% tariff slammed down on steel, aluminum, lumber, and auto parts industries that formed the backbone of Canadian exports. The numbers told the story. In the second quarter of 2025, exports fell 13%, with energy plunging nearly 20%. Alberta took the hardest hit, its oil and gas sector absorbing losses that rippled through entire communities. The expectation in Washington was that Canada would lash out, just as it had during earlier disputes when whiskey and other symbolic American goods were pulled off shelves in retaliation. But this time was different. Instead of anger, Ottawa displayed calm calculation. Prime Minister Mark Carney made no fiery speeches. No retaliatory measures were announced overnight. Canada was choosing patience, not panic. And that quiet decision would set the tone for everything that followed. While Washington turned up the pressure, Ottawa looked elsewhere. The answer lay not across the Atlantic or Pacific, but just to the south, Mexico. Within days, Canada's finance and foreign affairs ministers were in Mexico City, meeting with President Claudia Sheinbaum. Their goal: strengthen trade ties and create a buffer against Trump's unpredictable moves. The timing was no coincidence. Trump had just given Mexico a 90-day grace period before imposing similar tariffs, a privilege Canada never received. Ottawa knew it couldn't afford to stand alone. Strengthening ties with Mexico meant survival and perhaps even leverage in the upcoming USMCA review. For Canadians, the message was clear. If Washington was playing hardball, Ottawa would expand the playing field. And behind the quiet diplomacy was an uncomfortable reality Trump had handed Mexico an advantage Canada couldn't ignore. Yet, even as tariffs dominated headlines, not everything was as it seemed. Canada's most valuable export oil remained untouched. More than 4 million barrels flow into the United States every day, fueling refineries in the Midwest. If Trump had truly wanted to cripple Canada, crude oil was the weapon, but it was left off the list. That wasn't an oversight. It was strategy. By focusing exports on goods protected under USMCA, Canada had shielded its core industries. Over 80% of Canadian exports still flowed freely. Even copper, the commodity Trump targeted most aggressively, wasn't the knockout punch it appeared. Processed products like pipes and wiring faced tariffs, but raw cathodes and concentrates, the bulk of Canada's copper exports, slipped through untouched. The numbers showed it clearly. While the rhetoric in Washington was loud, the practical impact was far more modest. Canada wasn't just absorbing the hit, it was adapting, redirecting trade to survive. and this adaptability was about to be tested even further. Just hours before a critical deadline, Trump did something unexpected. He posted on Truth Social, tying Canada's trade negotiations to its recognition of the state of Palestine. In an instant, the playing field shifted from economics to geopolitics. For Ottawa, this was more than a curveball, it was proof that the rules of the game could change at any moment. One day tariffs were about steel and copper, the next they were about foreign policy. If Canada signed too quickly, it risked being trapped in a cycle where every new demand came with a new price. Prime Minister Carney's response was silence. No rushing, no concessions. The strategy was simple. Let the storm pass, even if it meant enduring short-term pain. The message was clear. Canada would not be dragged into negotiations that changed with every social media post. Behind the calm exterior was a calculated plan. Analysts pointed out that Canada's current terms under USMCA were already stronger than deals Washington had signed with South Korea or the European Union. Accepting a rushed, watered-down agreement could actually leave Canada worse off. Carney understood that patience was power. By waiting, Ottawa protected key sectors like energy and defense while keeping options open for better terms. Unlike Trump's strategy of quick victories and loud headlines, Canada's approach was slow, deliberate, and built on endurance. This wasn't weakness, it was the long game. While Washington shouted, Ottawa was quietly building leverage. And that leverage extended far beyond North America. Even though 95% of Canadian exports remained safe under USMCA, the symbolic weight of tariffs was heavy. Ontario's steel and auto industries, pillars of the nation's economy, felt the political sting. Former U.S. Ambassador David Cohen warned openly that trust between the two allies, trust built over decades, was beginning to erode. And behind closed doors, Canada and Mexico were accelerating an ambitious project, the Northern Corridor. A massive $120 billion trade route designed to bypass the United States altogether. Now, its closest allies were planning escape routes. The symbolism was undeniable. Tariffs may have targeted goods, but the real damage was being done to trust, the one resource harder to rebuild than any trade balance. In Washington, the administration pointed to 3% GDP growth as proof that tariffs were working. But economists dug deeper. That number wasn't growth in the traditional sense. It was stockpiling. American companies had rushed to import goods before tariffs took effect, creating the illusion of a boom. The truth was far less flattering. The hundreds of trade deals Trump promised in April? By August, fewer than 10 had been signed. Canada was not among them. The reality was that America's aggressive strategy was isolating it from allies rather than bringing them closer. Meanwhile, Canada was showing that silence could be louder than threats. By preserving its energy exports, protecting supply chains, and nurturing quiet partnerships, Ottawa was carving out room to maneuver. Trump's loud, dramatic moves captured headlines. But in the long game of trade and diplomacy, the steady hand often wins. And that is the paradox of the moment. Tariffs meant to force compliance had instead revealed endurance. While America's families paid more for shoes, cars, and coffee, Canada was quietly proving that patience, not panic, might be the strongest weapon of all.